Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down big ideas. So today, we're going to dig into a 1400-year-old text, Surah Al-Thakathor from the Quran, and explore just how shockingly relevant it is to our modern obsession with always wanting more. It's a feeling we all know, right? That little voice in your head that says, what you have just isn't quite enough, especially when you see what someone else has. Well, that feeling is actually a really powerful psychological trigger, and it has a name. And this is it, relative deprivation. This is the spark that really lights the fire. I mean, think about it. You could be totally happy with your life, but the second you see your neighbor roll up with a second car or a friend buys a bigger house, bam, that feeling kicks in. It's suddenly not about what you need anymore, it's all about what they have. All right, so let's get into our first big idea here, this concept of the never-ending race. And we're not just talking about healthy ambition. The source describes this as a full-blown addiction to just accumulating stuff. The text gives us a specific name, takathor. And what's so important to understand is that this isn't about the natural drive to, build a better life. Takathor is when that drive gets twisted into an obsessive rivalry for more. It becomes a diversion so powerful that it can literally take over your entire life. And just listen to how it's described, a pathological chronic addiction. The idea here is that this drive for more can become so all-consuming that a person starts breaking their own moral code, turning into a monster just to get more money, more status, more power. So how does this even happen? Well, this breakdown is pretty fascinating. It all starts from a good place, something the text calls fitra, our pure natural instinct to survive and do well. But then, that instinct gets hijacked by social comparison, by that relative deprivation we just talked about, and before you know it, it's spun out of control into this destructive, vicious cycle of competition. Okay, section 2, the ultimate wake-up call. So if we're all caught in this race that just consumes our lives, what on earth finally stops it? Well, the answer we're given is pretty stark, and it's deeply personal. The text is incredibly blunt. It says the race stops the moment you reach the grave. That's it. It's not a finish line where you collect a prize. It's just the end of the game. All the distractions of chasing more are suddenly over, and a totally different reality kicks in. And this is such a brilliant distinction the source makes, right? It's not talking about some abstract, far-off apocalypse that might not even happen in our lifetime. No, the real wake-up call is what it calls the internal shocker, that personal, guaranteed moment of truth for every single one of us, where you might realize the whole race you were running was on the wrong track. So, moving on to our third section, when greed builds systems. This all leads to a really massive question. How does a personal flaw, like individual greed, get scaled up to become the engine for an entire global machine? And this is where this ancient warning gets incredibly modern. The argument made here is that capitalism itself is basically Takathor on a massive scale. It's a collective system, an organized machine, designed specifically to harness and amplify that deep-seated, never-satisfied human craving for more. And you can see how this system holds itself up with these huge pillars. You've got consumerism, which keeps us all wanting new stuff. Our spending concentrates wealth into banks and funds, which then fuels these massive corporate giants. And then even our education systems can get shaped to just train the next generation of workers to keep the whole machine humming. It all feeds back into itself. There's this really powerful story in the source material that just perfectly captures this idea of systemic pressure. It's about a man who tried so hard to resist taking bribes. He really wanted to stay clean. But the culture around him was so corrupt that eventually the system just wore him down. He gave up. So the analysis here argues that this is exactly why other economic systems, like socialism or communism, ultimately couldn't keep up. They were aiming for equality, but capitalism, it didn't promise equality. It promised more. More stuff, more choices, more personal wealth. It tapped directly into that inner Takathor. Okay, so if this whole more thing is presented as just a big distraction, a trap, then what are we supposed to do instead? Well, the source points us toward a completely different purpose for our lives. And really, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? If the point of life isn't just to collect the most toys before you die, then what in the world is it about? The alternative path that's laid out is an inward one. The real purpose, it suggests, isn't about hoarding things at all. It's about developing ourselves, tapping into our deepest potentials, growing as human beings, and maybe even contributing to something bigger than our own bank accounts. And this, right here, is really the heart of the message. It presents us with a very clear trade-off. As we pile on more and more possessions and become, quote, materialistically heavier, we run the real risk of becoming spiritually and morally lighter, of losing sight of our values and that true higher purpose. So the source leaves us with this one final, pretty haunting question to think about in our own lives. In this relentless modern pursuit of more, what is the real price we're all paying? What essential parts of ourselves are we losing along the way?